You think you know the story of the Iraq War. Shock and awe, weapons of mass destruction, the toppling of Saddam's statue. But what if I told you that in the chaos of Baghdad's fall, while the world watched palaces burn and government buildings collapse, a different kind of battle was being fought in the shadows, not for territory or political power, but for the very soul of human civilization. This is the story they don't want you to know. The story of how a group of American National Guard reservists, teachers and historians in their civilian lives, received a desperate plea from Iraqi archaeologists and made a choice that would define their understanding of duty forever. How they disobeyed direct orders, risked court-martial, and forged an alliance with the enemy to save treasures that belonged not to any nation, but to all humanity. But this isn't just another tale of wartime heroism. This is the untold story of Sergeant Michael Torres and Dr. Layla Al-Rashid, two people from different worlds who discovered that some things are more important than politics, nationalism, or military orders, who risked everything to prove that in the midst of destruction, the human impulse to preserve and protect can triumph over the urge to conquer and destroy. Welcome to the most unauthorized rescue mission in military history, where the real enemy wasn't insurgents or foreign armies, but time itself, and where victory was measured not in territory captured, but in artifacts saved from the flames of war. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about the Iraq War, the nature of duty, and the price of choosing conscience over orders when civilization itself hangs in the balance. April 12, 2003. Baghdad has fallen, but the war is far from over. Sergeant Michael Torres stands at a checkpoint on Haifa Street, watching smoke rise from a dozen fires across the city, while trying to make sense of orders that seem to change every hour. His unit, Charlie Company, 142nd Infantry Regiment of the Oregon National Guard, was supposed to be providing security for humanitarian operations. Instead, they're manning a roadblock that serves no apparent strategic purpose, while the city tears itself apart around them. Torres is 34 years old, a high school history teacher from Portland who joined the Guard to help pay for his master's degree and never expected to find himself in a war zone. His men are cut from the same cloth, weekend warriors with civilian jobs and families back home, pressed into service for a conflict none of them fully understand. Private First Class Danny Chen teaches elementary school in Eugene. Specialist Robert Martinez runs a small auto repair shop in Salem. Corporal James Washington is a graduate student in archaeology at the University of Oregon, working on his thesis about Mesopotamian civilization when the call-up came. They're good soldiers, but they're also thinking men who understand that what they're witnessing isn't just the fall of a government. It's the collapse of order itself, the kind of chaos that destroys not just buildings and institutions, but the accumulated knowledge and culture of thousands of years. The looting began within hours of Saddam's fall. First it was government buildings, then businesses, then hospitals and schools. Now it's spreading to museums, libraries, and archaeological sites, places that contain irreplaceable artifacts from the cradle of civilization itself. Sarge, Washington says, lowering his binoculars and pointing toward the smoke rising from the direction of the National Museum of Iraq. That's not just random looting anymore. Those fires are too organized, too systematic. Someone's targeting cultural sites specifically. Torres follows his gaze, feeling a sick certainty in his stomach. He's read the intelligence reports about organized crime syndicates and international art dealers who see the chaos in Iraq as an opportunity to loot artifacts worth millions on the black market. While the world focuses on political and military developments, criminals are systematically stripping Iraq of its cultural heritage. Not our problem, he says, repeating the mantra that's been drilled into them since they arrived. We're here to provide security, not to play police in a civil war. But even as he says the words, Torres knows they ring hollow. How do you provide security while watching civilization burn? How do you maintain order while ignoring the destruction of irreplaceable human heritage? The answer comes in the form of a desperate woman who approaches their checkpoint just after noon, carrying a small child and speaking rapid Arabic to anyone who will listen. Her name is Dr. Layla Al-Rashid, and she's the Deputy Director of the National Museum of Iraq. At 29, she's one of the youngest curators ever appointed to such a position, a brilliant archaeologist who has dedicated her life to preserving Iraq's cultural treasures. She speaks fluent English, learned during graduate studies at Oxford, but desperation has reduced her to pleading in any language that might get through to the American soldiers. "Please," she says, when she realizes that Washington speaks some Arabic, "you must help us. They are destroying everything, 5,000 years of history, and they are burning it for sport." Washington translates for Torres, but the sergeant's response is predictable. "Ma'am, we can't get involved in civilian matters. You need to contact the Civil Affairs Unit." "There is no Civil Affairs Unit." Dr. Al-Rashid's voice rises with frustration and despair. "There is no government, no police, no authority, except men with guns who take whatever they want. In 3 days, they have stolen more artifacts than we lost in 20 years of war and sanctions." She describes a scene from hell, looters smashing display cases to get at gold jewelry, then discarding priceless pottery because it has no obvious monetary value. Manuscripts being burned for warmth, while statues that survived the fall of Babylon are sledge-hammered into pieces, small enough to smuggle out of the country. "The Wak of Ays," she says, tears streaming down her face. 5,000 years old, the oldest narrative relief sculpture in the world. They took it yesterday. By now it's probably being cut into pieces for sale to private collectors who will never display it, never study it, never let the world see it again. Washington translates, and Torres can see the impact of her words on his men. These aren't career soldiers who've learned to compartmentalize human suffering. They're civilians in uniform, teachers and students who understand the value of what's being lost. "Sarge," Chen says quietly, "my kids study Mesopotamian history in 4th grade. They learn about the Code of Hammurabi, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the invention of writing. All of that comes from here. We're watching the destruction of the foundation of human civilization." Torres knows Chen is right, but he also knows the military reality. They have orders, a chain of command, rules of engagement that don't include protecting museums or chasing art thieves. Getting involved in civilian affairs without authorization could result in court-martial, the end of their military careers, and serious legal consequences. But Dr. Al-Rashid isn't finished with her plea. "I have a proposal," she says, switching to English that's accented but perfectly clear. "There are artifacts we managed to hide before the looting began. Pieces too valuable to leave in the museum, too important to lose. We need help moving them to a secure location, somewhere the looters cannot reach." "Where?" Torres asks despite himself. "The Green Zone, the American compound. If we can get them there, they will be safe until order is restored." It's a reasonable plan, but it's also completely unauthorized. The Green Zone is a secure military area, off-limits to civilians, except under very specific circumstances. Bringing in Iraqi nationals, even friendly ones, would require approvals that could take weeks to obtain, time they don't have. "I can't authorize that," Torres says. "I don't have the authority to—" "Then who does?" Dr. Al-Rashid interrupts. "Who has the authority to save 5,000 years of human history? Who has the power to prevent the destruction of artifacts that belong not just to Iraq, but to all humanity?" It's a question that cuts to the heart of the moral dilemma facing every soldier in Iraq. When do you follow orders, and when do you follow your conscience? When does military discipline become complicity in cultural genocide? The debate that follows among Torres's men reveals the deep divisions that exist within the American military about their role in Iraq. Some argue that their job is to follow orders, not to make policy decisions about cultural preservation. Others contend that preventing the destruction of irreplaceable artifacts is exactly the kind of humanitarian mission they should be supporting. Washington, with his background in archaeology, becomes the most passionate advocate for helping Dr. Al-Rashid. "Sarge, we're not just talking about old pots and statues," he argues. "These are the artifacts that tell the story of human civilization. The first laws, the first literature, the first cities. If we let them be destroyed or stolen, we're not just failing Iraq, we're failing history itself." Martinez, the pragmatist of the group, raises the obvious concerns. What happens when our CO finds out? What happens when Division Command learns that we've been running unauthorized operations with Iraqi civilians? We could all end up in Leavenworth. It's a valid concern, but Chen has a different perspective. What happens when we go home and have to explain to our students that we watched the cradle of civilization get looted and did nothing to stop it? What happens when we have to tell them that we chose to follow orders instead of doing what was right? The moral weight of the decision falls on Torres, who understands that whatever choice he makes will define not just his military career, but his understanding of what it means to be a soldier, an American and a human being. Dr. Al-Rashid watches this debate with growing desperation, understanding that her people's cultural heritage hangs in the balance of a decision being made by foreign soldiers who have no obligation to help her and every reason to refuse. "I know what I'm asking," she says finally. "I know the risk you would be taking, but please understand. These artifacts are not just Iraqi treasures, they are human treasures. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the Code of Hammurabi, the mathematical tablets that gave us the concept of zero, these belong to all of us. If they are lost forever." Torres looks at his men, seeing his own internal conflict reflected in their faces. They're soldiers trained to follow orders and maintain discipline, but they're also human beings, capable of understanding that some things transcend military protocol. "How many artifacts are we talking about?" he asks. 50 pieces, Dr. Al-Rashid replies quickly, sensing an opening. "The most important items from our collection, small enough to transport, valuable enough to justify the risk. And you have a secure location where they're currently hidden?" "Yes. My apartment building has a basement that the looters haven't found yet, but it's only a matter of time before they search every building in the area." Torres makes his decision with the understanding that it will change everything for him and his men. "We'll help you," he says, "but we do this my way, on my timeline, and if anything goes wrong, you've never seen us before." The relief on Dr. Al-Rashid's face is immediate and overwhelming. For the first time since the looting began, she has hope that something can be saved from the destruction. But Torres is already thinking about the practical challenges of what they've agreed to do. Moving 50 artifacts through a war zone, past military checkpoints and potential looters, while maintaining the pretense that they're conducting authorized operations. It's a mission that would challenge a special operations unit, let alone a group of National Guard teachers. "We'll need a plan," he tells his men, "a good one, because if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right." What none of them realize is that they're about to embark on one of the most dangerous and morally complex missions of the entire Iraq War. An operation that will test not just their military skills, but their understanding of duty, loyalty, and the price of doing what's right when the world is falling apart around them. April 13th, 2003, 0300 hours. The rescue mission begins in the pre-dawn darkness of Baghdad, with Torres and his men moving through streets that have become a maze of checkpoints, burning vehicles, and roving bands of looters. The plan they've developed is simple in concept, but terrifyingly complex in execution. Using their military vehicles and uniforms as cover, they'll escort Dr. Al-Rashid to her apartment building, load the artifacts into their Humvees, and transport them to a secure storage facility within the Green Zone. To any observers, it will look like a routine patrol with a civilian interpreter, but the reality is far more dangerous. They're operating without authorization in a city where the rules of engagement change hourly, where friendly forces might mistake them for insurgents, where actual insurgents might target them as occupiers. And they're doing it all while carrying artifacts worth millions of dollars on the black market, treasures that criminal organizations would kill for without hesitation. Dr. Al-Rashid meets them at the designated rendezvous point, a bombed-out gas station on the outskirts of her neighborhood. She's not alone. With her are 3 other museum staff members who have been helping to hide the artifacts, including Dr. Ahmed Hassan, the museum's chief conservator, and Fatima Al-Zahra, a young graduate student who specializes in ancient manuscripts. "These are my colleagues," Dr. Al-Rashid explains, as Torres's men take defensive positions around the vehicles. "They know where every piece is hidden, how to handle them safely. Without them, you'll never be able to move the artifacts without damaging them." Torres realizes that his simple escort mission has just become a complex operation involving multiple Iraqi civilians, each of whom represents an additional security risk and potential complication. But it's too late to back out now. The artifacts are already at risk, and every hour of delay increases the chance that looters will find them. The journey to Dr. Al-Rashid's apartment building takes them through the heart of Baghdad's chaos. They pass burning government buildings, abandoned military vehicles, and groups of civilians carrying everything from television sets to office furniture. The looting has taken on a carnival atmosphere, with entire families participating in the systematic stripping of public buildings. But it's the organized nature of some of the theft that truly disturbs Torres and his men. They observe trucks with sophisticated lifting equipment, removing large statues from archaeological sites, teams of men with metal detectors searching systematically through ruins, and what appears to be a well-coordinated operation to strip the National Library of its most valuable manuscripts. This isn't random looting, Washington observes, as they watch a group of men carefully wrapping ancient pottery before loading it into a truck with foreign license plates. This is industrial-scale cultural theft. Dr. Al-Rashid nods grimly. There are lists, she explains, catalogues of our most valuable pieces circulated among international dealers months before the invasion. They knew exactly what to look for, exactly where to find it. This was planned. The revelation adds urgency to their mission, but also complexity. If international criminal organizations are involved in the looting, then the artifacts they're trying to save are worth far more than Torres initially understood. They're not just preserving cultural heritage, they're denying millions of dollars in profit to criminals who have turned war into a business opportunity. Dr. Al-Rashid's apartment building is a modest structure in a middle-class neighborhood that has so far escaped the worst of the looting. But the signs of social breakdown are everywhere. Broken windows, abandoned cars, graffiti in multiple languages that speaks to the international nature of the chaos. The basement where the artifacts are hidden is a testament to the dedication and ingenuity of the museum staff. Working in secret over several weeks, they've created a climate-controlled storage area using improvised equipment and materials salvaged from the museum. The artifacts are carefully wrapped and catalogued, each piece documented with photographs and detailed descriptions. What Torres sees when they open the storage area takes his breath away. These aren't just museum pieces or archaeological curiosities. They're the foundation stones of human civilization, cuneiform tablets that contain the world's first written laws, cylinder seals that bear the names of kings who ruled when Rome was just a collection of mud huts, statues and reliefs that show the artistic achievements of cultures that flourished thousands of years before Christ. This is the Mask of Waka, Dr. Al-Rashid says, carefully unwrapping a limestone carving that seems to glow in the dim light of the basement. 3,000 years old, one of the earliest known works of naturalistic art. And this, she continues, moving to another wrapped object, is a tablet containing part of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's first great work of literature. Washington, despite his archaeological training, is overwhelmed by what he's seeing. Sarge, some of these pieces, they're in every art history textbook ever written. They're literally priceless. But Torres is thinking like a soldier, not an art historian. 50 artifacts means 50 separate items to transport, secure, and account for. Each piece represents a potential point of failure, a chance for something to go wrong that could compromise the entire mission. How long to load everything? He asks Dr. Hassan, the chief conservator. If we're careful, if we take the time to properly secure each piece, 6 hours, maybe 8. We don't have 8 hours, Torres replies. We need to be out of here before full daylight, before the neighborhood wakes up and people start asking questions. The compromise they reach reflects the desperate nature of their situation. They'll take the most important pieces first, the artifacts that are truly irreplaceable, and come back for the rest if possible. It's a heartbreaking decision for the museum staff, who understand that anything left behind will likely be lost forever. The loading process becomes a crash course in archaeological conservation, with Dr. Al-Rashid and her colleagues teaching Torres's men how to handle artifacts that have survived for millennia but could be destroyed by a single careless movement. Each piece must be wrapped in specific materials, positioned to avoid stress points, and secured against the vibrations and impacts of military vehicle transport. Chen, despite his background as an elementary school teacher, proves to have a natural talent for the delicate work. His small hands and patient temperament make him ideal for handling the most fragile pieces, while his genuine reverence for what they represent ensures that he treats each artifact with appropriate care. Mr. Chen, Dr. Alzara says, as they work together to secure a collection of cylinder seals, you have the hands of a conservator. If you ever decide to change careers, it's a moment of levity in an otherwise tense situation, but it also illustrates the human connections that are forming between the American soldiers and Iraqi academics. Despite the language barriers and cultural differences, they're united by a shared understanding of what they're trying to preserve. The real test comes when they encounter their first checkpoint. Lieutenant Colonel Bradley Morrison, commanding officer of the 3rd Brigade Combat Team, has established a security perimeter around the government district that includes random vehicle inspections. When Torres's convoy approaches the checkpoint, they're flagged for a routine search that could expose their unauthorized mission. Sergeant Torres, the MP at the checkpoint, says, consulting his clipboard, "You're not on the patrol roster for this sector. What's your mission?" Torres has prepared for this moment, but his answer still feels like a betrayal of everything he's been taught about military honesty and integrity. "Escort duty, sir. Transporting civilian interpreters and their personal effects to the green zone for processing." It's technically true. Dr. Al-Rashid and her colleagues are civilians, and the artifacts could be considered their personal effects. But it's also a deliberate deception that could result in serious consequences if discovered. The MP looks skeptical, but he's also overworked and dealing with dozens of similar situations every day. Personal effects could mean anything in a war zone where the normal rules of civilian life have broken down. "Any weapons or contraband?" he asks, moving toward the back of the lead Humvee. "No, sir," Torres replies, his heart pounding as he watches the MP approach the carefully wrapped artifacts. If the soldier decides to unwrap any of the packages, the mission is over. But Dr. Al-Rashid saves the situation with a performance that would make a professional actress proud. "Please," she says in heavily accented English, stepping forward with tears in her eyes, "these are my family's things. My grandmother's jewelry, my father's books. Everything else is gone, burned or stolen. This is all we have left." The MP looks at her with the mixture of sympathy and exhaustion that characterizes most American soldiers' interactions with Iraqi civilians. He's seen enough genuine suffering to recognize it, and he has no desire to add to it by confiscating what appears to be a refugee family's last possessions. "Go ahead," he says, waving them through. "Good luck." As they drive away from the checkpoint, Torres realizes that they've crossed a line that goes beyond military protocol. They're not just disobeying orders, they're actively deceiving their own forces, lying to fellow soldiers who are trying to do their jobs. It's a betrayal that weighs heavily on him, but it's also necessary to accomplish their mission. The green zone, when they finally reach it, represents both salvation and new challenges. The secure compound is heavily guarded and carefully controlled, with multiple layers of security that are designed to keep unauthorized personnel out. Getting Dr. Fu Al-Rashid and her colleagues inside will require more deception, more creative interpretation of regulations that were never designed to accommodate their situation. But Torres has an advantage that he hasn't fully appreciated until now. The chaos of the early occupation means that normal procedures are often suspended or improvised. In the confusion of establishing a new government and managing a conquered city, unusual situations are becoming routine. The storage facility he's identified is a former government warehouse that's been converted into a temporary depot for humanitarian supplies. It's secure, climate-controlled, and most importantly, it's under American military control. If they can get the artifacts inside, they'll be safe from looters and criminals. But first they have to convince the warehouse commander that their mission is legitimate. Captain Sarah Williams, the officer in charge of the facility, is a logistics specialist from the Army Reserve who's been dealing with unusual requests and improvised solutions since the day she arrived in Baghdad. When Torres approaches her with his carefully rehearsed explanation, she listens with the weary patience of someone who's heard every possible variation of, "This is really important, and we need your help." "Let me get this straight," she says, after Torres finishes his pitch. "You want me to provide secure storage for Iraqi cultural artifacts that you've transported here without proper authorization, using military vehicles and personnel for a mission that's not on any official order I've seen." "Yes, ma'am," Torres replies, knowing that honesty is his only option at this point. Captain Williams stares at him for a long moment, then looks at Dr. Al-Rashid and her colleagues, who are waiting nervously beside the Humvees loaded with priceless artifacts. "Sergeant," she says finally, "do you have any idea how much paperwork this is going to generate? How many regulations we're probably violating? How much trouble we could all be in if this goes wrong?" "Yes, ma'am, I do." "Good, because I want you to understand exactly what you're asking me to risk." She pauses, then smiles for the first time since they arrived. "Now let's get these artifacts inside before someone with more sense than either of us shows up and stops us." The unloading process takes place under the watchful eyes of American guards who have been briefed to treat the operation as routine humanitarian assistance. Dr. Al-Rashid and her colleagues work with Torres's men to carefully transfer each artifact to climate-controlled storage units, documenting everything with photographs and detailed inventories. As they work, Dr. Al-Rashid shares stories about the pieces they're saving, not just their historical significance, but their personal meaning to the Iraqi people. The cylinder seal that bears the name of Hammurabi himself, the tablet that contains the world's first known recipe, the statue that survived the Mongol invasion of Baghdad in 1258, only to face destruction in 2003. "You must understand," she tells Torres as they secure the last of the artifacts, "these pieces are not just objects in a museum. They are our connection to our ancestors, our proof that this land was once the center of human civilization. When you save them, you save part of our soul." It's a responsibility that Torres never expected to carry, and one that will stay with him long after his deployment ends. But as he looks at the artifacts now safely stored in the American compound, he understands that some missions transcend military orders, that some duties are higher than the chain of command. The rescue mission is complete, but the real challenge is just beginning. Now they have to keep their unauthorized operations secret, while ensuring that the artifacts remain safe until they can be returned to Iraqi control. It's a task that will test not just their military skills, but their ability to navigate the complex moral landscape of an occupation that was supposed to bring freedom, but has instead brought chaos. April 20th, 2003. 1 week after the rescue mission, Torres receives the summons he's been dreading. Report to Colonel Morrison's office immediately for a discussion of recent activities. The investigation began when a routine audit of vehicle logs revealed discrepancies in Torres's patrol reports, mileage that didn't match stated destinations, fuel consumption that suggested unauthorized detours, and most damning of all, radio traffic that referenced civilian coordination during periods when no such activities were officially authorized. Torres enters the colonel's office, knowing that his military career is probably over, but also knowing that he would make the same choice again if faced with the same circumstances. Some things are more important than career advancement or military protocol. Colonel Morrison is a career officer, a West Point graduate who has spent his entire adult life in the Army and believes deeply in the importance of discipline, order, and following the chain of command. He's also a student of history who understands the cultural significance of what Torres and his men accomplished. "Sergeant," Morrison begins, his voice carefully neutral, "I've been reviewing your unit's activities over the past week, and I have some questions about your interpretation of your mission parameters." Torres knows there's no point in denying what happened. The evidence is too clear, and lying would only make the situation worse. "Sir, my men and I assisted Iraqi civilians in preserving cultural artifacts that were at risk of being destroyed or stolen, without authorization, using military vehicles and personnel for a mission that was not approved by your chain of command." "Yes, sir." Morrison stares at him for a long moment, then opens a folder on his desk. "Do you know what this is, Sergeant?" Torres looks at the documents and photographs Morrison spreads across the desk, images of the artifacts they saved, detailed inventories of their historical significance, and what appears to be a preliminary assessment of their cultural and monetary value. "It's a report from the State Department's Cultural Preservation Unit," Morrison continues. "They've been trying to coordinate exactly the kind of mission you conducted, but they've been tied up in bureaucratic red tape for weeks. According to their assessment, the artifacts you saved represent some of the most important cultural treasures in human history." Torres isn't sure if this is good news or bad news. The fact that official agencies were planning similar missions might justify his actions, but it might also emphasize how far outside proper channels he operated. "Sir, I understand that we violated protocol, but those artifacts were going to be lost forever if we waited for official authorization. Sometimes you have to choose between following orders and doing what's right." It's exactly the wrong thing to say to a career military officer, and Torres knows it the moment the words leave his mouth. The Army doesn't function on individual moral judgments. It functions on discipline, hierarchy, and the assumption that orders from above incorporate moral considerations that individual soldiers aren't qualified to make. But Morrison's response surprises him. "Sergeant, do you know why I became a soldier?" "No, sir. Because I believe that the military exists to protect things that are worth protecting: freedom, democracy, human dignity, the values that make civilization possible. But sometimes we get so focused on following orders that we forget what those orders are supposed to accomplish. Morrison stands and walks to the window overlooking the green zone, where the artifacts Torres saved are now safely stored under American protection. I've spent the last week trying to decide whether to court-martial you or recommend you for a commendation. You disobeyed direct orders, operated outside your authority, and put your men at risk for a mission that had no official sanction. By every military standard, you should be facing serious disciplinary action. Torres waits for the other shoe to drop, knowing that his fate is in the hands of a man who has every reason to make an example of him. But, Morrison continues, you also saved irreplaceable artifacts that represent the foundation of human civilization. You forged an alliance with Iraqi civilians that demonstrates the best of American values. And you did it all while maintaining operational security and completing your primary mission. The colonel turns back to face Torres, and for the first time, there's something that might be approval in his expression. The State Department wants to meet with you and your men. They're interested in formalizing the kind of cultural preservation operations you conducted, with proper authorization and support. They're also interested in working with Dr. Al-Rashid and her colleagues to identify other artifacts that need protection. It's not the punishment Torres expected, but it's also not quite the vindication he might have hoped for. The Army is offering him a chance to turn his unauthorized mission into an official program, but only if he's willing to work within the system he circumvented. What about my men, sir? They followed my orders, trusted my judgment. If there are consequences, they should fall on me, not them. Morrison nods approvingly. That's exactly what I expected you to say, and it's exactly why I'm not going to court-martial any of you. Your men showed initiative, courage, and moral judgment under difficult circumstances. Those are qualities the Army needs, especially in a complex environment like Iraq. But the colonel's next words carry a warning that Torres understands all too well. However, this kind of unauthorized operation cannot become a precedent. Military discipline exists for good reasons, and individual soldiers cannot be allowed to make policy decisions based on their personal moral judgments. What you did was right, but it was also dangerous, to you, to your men, and to the broader mission. It's the eternal tension in military service, the need for discipline and order versus the requirement for moral courage and individual initiative. Torres and his men found themselves in a situation where those two imperatives conflicted, and they chose conscience over compliance. The meeting with the State Department representatives takes place the following day, in a conference room that feels more like a university seminar than a military briefing. The officials are academics and diplomats rather than soldiers, people who understand the cultural significance of what Torres's unit accomplished. Dr. Margaret Chen, the State Department's senior advisor on cultural preservation, is particularly interested in the alliance Torres forged with Dr. Al-Rashid and her colleagues. What you've demonstrated, she tells Torres and his men, is that American forces can work effectively with Iraqi civilians when there's a shared commitment to preserving something valuable. That's exactly the kind of partnership we need to build if we're going to succeed in Iraq. But the real validation comes from Dr. Al-Rashid herself, who has been invited to participate in the discussions about formalizing cultural preservation operations. Sergeant Torres and his men risked their careers to save our heritage, she tells the assembled officials. They showed us that Americans can be more than conquerors. They can be protectors of the things that make us human. The program that emerges from these discussions will eventually become the Cultural Property Protection Initiative, a joint American-Iraqi effort to identify and preserve archaeological sites and cultural artifacts throughout the country. Torres and his men will be among the first soldiers trained in cultural preservation techniques, and Dr. Al-Rashid will become one of the program's key Iraqi partners. But the personal cost of their unauthorized mission continues to reverberate long after the official recognition and new assignments. Washington, the archaeology graduate student, finds that his experience in Iraq has fundamentally changed his understanding of his field. I used to think archaeology was about studying the past, he tells Torres during one of their conversations. Now I understand that it's about preserving the future, making sure that future generations have access to their cultural heritage. Chen, the elementary school teacher, returns to Oregon with stories that transform his classroom. His students become passionate advocates for cultural preservation, raising money to support archaeological projects and writing letters to politicians about the importance of protecting historical sites. Martinez, the auto mechanic, discovers that his mechanical skills translate well to conservation work. He eventually changes careers, becoming a specialist in the restoration of ancient metalwork and helping to repair artifacts damaged during the looting of Iraqi museums. But it's Torres himself who carries the heaviest burden from their unauthorized mission. The knowledge that he violated military discipline to follow his conscience creates a tension that will define the rest of his military service and his civilian career. "I keep thinking about the artifacts we didn't save," he tells his wife during one of their phone conversations. "The pieces that were destroyed or stolen while we were following proper procedures. How many irreplaceable treasures were lost because we were too concerned about authorization and chain of command?" It's a question that has no good answer because it touches on the fundamental tension between individual moral responsibility and institutional authority. Torres and his men proved that sometimes doing the right thing requires breaking the rules, but they also demonstrated the dangers of allowing individual soldiers to make policy decisions based on their personal judgments. The artifacts they saved are eventually returned to Iraqi control, becoming the foundation of a new national museum that opens in Baghdad 5 years after the invasion. Dr. Al-Rashid serves as its director, and she makes sure that the story of the American soldiers who risked their careers to save Iraqi cultural heritage is prominently displayed alongside the artifacts themselves. But perhaps the most important legacy of their mission is the precedent it established for military-civilian cooperation in cultural preservation. The techniques they developed, the relationships they forged, and the moral courage they demonstrated become models for similar operations in Afghanistan, Syria, and other conflict zones where cultural heritage is threatened by war and terrorism. The lesson of the Baghdad rescue mission is not that soldiers should routinely disobey orders, or that individual moral judgment should supersede military discipline. It's that in complex situations where multiple values conflict, good people must sometimes choose between competing definitions of duty. Torres and his men chose to prioritize their duty to human civilization over their duty to military protocol, and history has largely vindicated that choice. But their story also illustrates the personal cost of moral courage, the price that individuals pay when they choose conscience over compliance. Military discipline exists for good reasons, and undermining it carries real risks, not just to individual careers, but to the effectiveness and cohesion of military units. The unauthorized rescue mission in Baghdad succeeded because it was conducted by thoughtful, principled people who understood both the importance of what they were trying to preserve and the risks they were taking to preserve it. It worked because Torres and his men were motivated not by personal gain or political ideology, but by a genuine commitment to protecting something that belonged to all humanity. Stories like this remind us that in times of crisis, ordinary people are often called upon to make extraordinary moral choices. The soldiers and civilians who saved Iraq's cultural treasures didn't set out to become heroes. They simply found themselves in a situation where doing nothing would have been a betrayal of everything they believed in. That's what we explore here. The moments when individuals must choose between competing loyalties, when following orders, conflicts with following conscience, when the rules designed to maintain order prevent the protection of what makes order worthwhile. If you believe these stories matter, if you want to understand the real complexity of moral courage in extreme circumstances, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Because there are so many more stories like this one, waiting to be told with the honesty and nuance they deserve. You won't want to miss what we discover next.